In high school, I slowly started making my way through iconic 2000s rom-coms, including How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, The Proposal, and of course, 27 Dresses. Now, I have always loved 27 Dresses beyond any other rom-com from that era, and it may be just because James Marsden is the male lead, but really, I love the plot, the character growth, and everything about this movie is just so perfect to me, and that's why I wanted to take a deeper look into the psychology of each of the characters and see why this movie has such a mass appeal. So, first of all, sorry for my voice, I'm a little sick right now, and second of all, get comfy, get a snack, and let's dive in. Okay, so of course we have to start with Jane. On the surface, Jane is the perfect friend. She's organized, dependable, and she's literally willing to change 2 outfits in the back of a moving taxi to make sure 2 different people feel supported on their wedding days. If that doesn't scream amazing friend, I don't know what does. But from a psychological perspective, Jane is a classic case of a high-functioning people pleaser. And what's interesting is why she has all those 27 dresses stuffed into her closet. I mean, in the movie, Kevin calls them hideous, but to Jane, those dresses are like visual proof of her worth. So, from my perspective, what I see is Jane suffering from parentification. We know her mom passed away when she was young, and she immediately kind of stepped into this role of caretaker of her younger sister Tess and her dad. We see this in the opening scene where she's helping Tess go to the bathroom and helping her dad when he is visibly stressed. When a child is forced to take on an adult emotional responsibilities too early, they learn a very dangerous lesson, and that is that they are only lovable if they are being useful to people. And unfortunately, that kind of becomes her main identity as she grows up. So those 27 dresses aren't just taking up space in her closet, they work as identity anchors for her. So every time she puts on that, let's say the olive green bridesmaid dress that she has in her closet, she's reinforcing the idea that she is the selfless one. And she's sort of addicted to this helper's high, as I like to say, because it's the only time she feels she has a right to exist in the room. And also, I think when discussing Jane, it's important to look at her crush on her boss, George, because this is what psychologists say is defense pining, which is very interesting actually. But essentially, by loving a man who is clearly oblivious to her and her feelings, Jane creates a safe psychological distance for herself. If she went for someone who was actually available, then she'd have to open herself up and be vulnerable, which she clearly has a problem with. It's scary for her, and she instead prefers to daydream and be the perfect person to everyone around her. The dresses that she has act sort of like a shield for her. As long as she's busy planning someone else's happily ever after, she has a valid excuse for why hers hasn't started yet. And she isn't falling in love because she's just too busy being a good person. So it kind of becomes an exhausting but sort of genius defense mechanism for her. Now let's move on to my favorite character, Kevin. Because while Jane is the wedding enthusiast, Kevin is the wedding skeptic. As we see, he's a very big cynic, and extreme cynicism in psychology is rarely just a personality trait. It's usually a secondary emotion that's used to protect a very vulnerable primary one. Kevin is basically the classic example of avoidant attachment. We find out later that his own marriage ended in a pretty awful way, with his wife leaving him for his college best friend. And because of that, I think that trauma shaped his entire worldview, and from there he decided that weddings are a sham and love isn't real, and from there he can come to the conclusion if love isn't real, then he can never be hurt by it again. Kevin as a whole really uses intellectualization as a defense mechanism. And by writing columns about weddings, he gets to turn this deeply emotional human experience into a job that he can observe from a safe distance. And it also gives him superiority and control over something he didn't have control over in his actual life. And this is why I love Kevin and Jane's dynamic so much, because they are such a good example of psychological mirroring. I mean, Kevin is obsessed with Jane's story, not just because he's trying to get a good, scoop for his career, but because she represents the part of himself that he's tried to kill off. I mean, it's the part of him that actually wants to believe in the magic of love and weddings. He's mean to her because she's a mirror. He mocks her 27 dresses because I think on some level he's jealous of her ability to still hope, even though it's somewhat misplaced. His growth in the movie isn't just falling for Jane, it's a transition from being a cynic to someone who can show vulnerability. When he finally admits he likes her, he's essentially admitting that his defense shield failed, and that's the scariest thing that an avoidant person can do. Now that we've talked about my favorite character, we have to talk about my least favorite character, Tess. Now, I will say it is very easy to label her as the spoiled younger sister, but psychologically, Tess is a master of social mirroring and chameleon personality. If we really look at it, Tess's entire survival strategy in life is based on being whatever the most important person in the room wants her to be. With George, she becomes this whole different version of herself where she's a vegetarian hiker, which is nothing like her real personality. With Jane, she's a helpless child. This suggests a deep lack of core identity. Because Jane parentified herself and took care of everything, Tess never had to develop emotional muscles or a sense of responsibility. And this is why there is a dark side to people-pleasing, especially in Jane's case, because it moves from people-pleasing to full-on enabling. By never holding Tess accountable for anything, Jane actually kind of stunted Tess's emotional growth. Tess isn't just mean when she lies to George, she's terrified that if she shows her true, messy self, she won't be loved. And because she's seen Jane be the perfect caretaker for her whole life, I think Tess kind of sees love as something that's continually performed and not something that's ingrained inside of you. Her relationship with George is built on cognitive dissonance. She's working so hard to maintain a lie that she eventually hits this weird breaking point. And when Jane finally exposes her at the rehearsal dinner, it's brutal, but from a clinical perspective, it is the first time that Tess is forced to stand in her own reality. She's finally forced to stop being a mirror and start being her own person. And can I just say, I hate how Jane had to apologize for exposing Tess. Was it the nicest thing to do to someone? No. But she totally deserved it, and the entire thing was called for. Same thing with the wedding dress debacle. How could Tess do that? I think Jane was so valid in her reactions, and I don't get why people punished her for it in the movie, but I'm getting off topic here. Let's get into our next and last main character, George. George is really interesting to me because he's not a bad guy, but he is incredibly oblivious. In psychology, we look at George through the lens of privilege and lack of perceptiveness. Because George is successful, handsome, and generally well-liked around his office, he doesn't really have to be observant, and he's lived a life where things usually go his way, which makes him the perfect target for Jane's idealization. Jane is suffering from the halo effect with George. Because he's a quote-unquote good man who runs an ethical business and loves dogs, she assumes that he must be the perfect romantic partner for her. So she projects all her desires onto him and ignores the fact that they clearly have zero emotional intimacy, and he doesn't even know anything about her. If you asked him what her favorite food is, what fear she has, or how she feels about him, he won't be able to answer any of that because he just does not know her. With Tess, on the other hand, George represents validation. He's kind of like the ultimate prize for Tess, and winning George isn't always about love for her. I think it's about proving she can be the responsible good girl that she's seen Tess be and she wants to be now that she's grown up. The most telling psychological moment for George is how quickly he falls for Tess's kind of act. It shows that George is attracted to low maintenance narratives, and he wants a life that looks good on paper, which is why he doesn't really see Jane struggle until it literally shoots him in the face. But he's the catalyst that proves that being nice like Jane or perfect like Tess's persona that she shows to him doesn't actually guarantee a true connection. So all this to say, why is 27 Dresses actually a top tier rom-com? To me, it's because the characters are fleshed out in a way that makes none of them inherently perfect or good or evil. They each have their own paths in the story, and it kind of makes the plot fall together perfectly. This is also one of the few rom-coms that doesn't have a hint of the cheating trope, which is something that is way too common in romance. I'm looking at you, people we meet on vacation. You're not free of this. And to me personally, cheating just takes a lot of the goodness out of a romance story, and it's not something enjoyable for me. Like, it takes me out of the immersion. But if you want to learn more about this, you should definitely check out my video on it. But anyways, back to 27 Dresses. To me, it will always be one of the superior rom-coms I've ever seen, and I hope you guys agree, but I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. If there's another rom-com you want me to look at, please tell me. I love doing this. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!